We'll wait 1-2 more minutes to see if anybody joins in. Then we'll get started. Okay, I think we should get going. Welcome, everybody. This is our second interim of email core, trying to get things done. I think we're getting really close now. I keep saying that, but I think I do believe it. Okay, so I'll start with chair slides first, then we switch to Ken's slides, then we come back to mine, and we'll continue from that. So we'll talk about AS first, and then about IANA stuff at the end. So, welcome February Interim. I'm Alexei, Todd is my co-chair. As usual, we are covered by Note well. I think all people here should be familiar with Note well and various documents governing this. Okay, I'll keep going. As a reminder, please use the best technical judgment and just be polite to each other. So we are using Miteco. Miteco session is being recorded. We have a note-taking page. Who can be note taker?
I will.
Thank you, Todd. That would be great. Okay, as I said, we'll start with AS working group last call issues first, and then we'll do a little bit of remaining IANA issues. Then we'll discuss next steps. So 5322 bis, still done. Great to hear. 21 bis. Oh, sorry, this should have been -40, but we have no remaining discusses. So the only thing is we want to just clean up IANA consideration and get this document into RFC editor's queue, which I think is very doable before Murray steps down. And then applicability statement is in working group last call. Jan, do you want to drive your
I will ask to do slides and see what happens. Actually, if I ask for slides, does that mean I need to upload them? No. Okay, here we go.
No, I think it's already in preloaded deck.
Okay, so I made a couple updates since Dublin. I'll go through those quickly. So based on the text that was in version 12 and we discussed in Dublin, we've closed these 6 open tickets. Hopefully those do not have to be reopened. Any questions on those before I skip? No, Alexi lost audio. Can anybody else hear me?
I can hear
I
you.
can hear you.
I guess I'll wait for Alexi to come back. While we're waiting for Alexi, anybody have any issues with these 6 being closed? All right, Lexi's back. All right, great. I'm not hearing anybody get restless about these 6, so I'm going to move to the next slide. Okay, issue number 93, mentioning SMTP auth. Alexi proposed this text, which is now at the very end of section 6.5. I believe, Alexi, you've closed this as a result? I don't recall.
I don't recall either, but this was, I had an action item to propose some text. Now I proposed it. I'm happy with this. If people are happy, we can close it.
Okay. So that was one of the changes. Okay. 112. This was originally text proposed for 21 bis. It has now been merged.
You've got someone in the queue.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where? Oh, John. I assume you're referring to 93, John? John, you are still muted.
I still can't hear John.
Yeah, his mute icon went away, but he is still muted. Yeah, good idea, Pete. I'll slide to the next. I'll go to the next slide, and when we hear John, we will back up. Okay, so this was basically an introductory text that was proposed for 5121 bis. It's now gone into the AS. This I was able to slide this into basically the start of section 6, which goes through all the various confidentiality and authentication stuff. List all the various topics that are going to be discussed further down. So the only other change here was the intro text for TLS has now been bumped down into a subsection of section 6. So I don't think this is going to be controversial. It's basically just a list of stuff that's going to be talked about in subsections of section 6. Todd,
I don't know when you might finally publish the AS. I do know that DMARC this may be published very soon, so I don't know if you need to update the reference to RFC 7489 or when you'll want to update the reference to RFC 7489.
yep,
I'm just
yeah,
noting
thanks for the heads up on that. I was unaware. My guess would be if that comes out before this gets published, the editors will make note of that, and we'll just do that in R48.
Great, thanks.
John, are you back?
Yeah,
All right, beautiful.
I said part of this in chat. I assume that you prepared your slides before I set up my review about 12 hours ago.
Yes, I did.
But there's a conflict in the document now about whether SMTP auth is in or out of scope. We say it's out of scope, and then we discuss it and recommend it. And I think the DKIM 2 problem is a little more complicated than a pointer to an updated document if that comes along, because basically the foundation for that effort is an argument that DKIM doesn't work, and we're implying that it does work. And we should at least alert people to the fact that there is an argument that it doesn't work where that work is going on.
Obviously, that's with regards to this intro text here, John, on 112.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess we'll.
This is all in the note I sent out last night, and if I should just avoid repeating myself, I can easily do that.
Yeah, I saw your note. I did not read it because I figured we'd be discussing it sometime today. And if we don't, then you and I are going to discuss offline whether you're going to do some edits yourself anyway. So we'll get to that when we get to it. All right. So, Alexi, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think we probably should open a separate issue on this. And then depending on if we decide that it's in scope, then no changes need to be done. Further changes needs to be done. If it's out of scope, then this line about the SMTP auth and the section comes out of the document. But
okay.
Well, if we decide it's in scope, then we need to take the language out which says it's out of scope.
Sure.
But what I would propose, if you open tickets as you think necessary, things you don't open tickets on, either Ken or I or the two of us in combination will sort of go fix.
Okay.
Okay. Other than DKIM, any issues with this intro text?
So I actually have a big slide with my working group last call comments on this, suggesting further improvements to it, but I think we can discuss it when we get to it. As a base and initial introduction, I think this is good, but yeah, we'll discuss it later in the session.
Okay, moving on. Another small change in regards to issue 127. We're just stating that start TLS is must implement. Any major issues here? I'm assuming John probably addressed this in his email this morning or last night as well, but again, I did not read it.
Ken, probably the most efficient thing to do is for you to go ahead and keep my mouth shut and for me to come on as soon as you get finished with these slides and talk about the grand overall picture here.
That works for me. Thanks, John. Okay, moving on. Okay, back to the quoted strings thing. Based on conversations we had in Dublin, I removed text related to keywords in the example, and we put an example in of a empty quoted string in display name, since we're saying that it is okay to do so. Continuing on with this, Alexi has proposed that we reintroduce the text related to empty quoted strings in local part, and the examples that were in, I think, back in version 11.
Yeah, I don't remember why we took it out, but I specifically want example of stuff that would unlikely to interpret in the first place. So that's, I just want to, having more examples, and the sentence helps basically.
Yeah, I don't recall why it came out either. I think originally this text was from John Levine. Maybe John decided he was no longer, didn't want to fight about it anymore. And I actually don't recall when it was last discussed. Vancouver, perhaps?
Yeah, if I can butt in for a moment.
Sure.
Yeah, I actually I misunderstood what the issue was, and I think we all agree that empty quoted strings never work. I was under the impression that quoted strings that have stuff in them never work, but actually they work well enough that I wouldn't say anything about it. So that basically leaving it advice about empty quoted strings and saying nothing about other kinds of quoted strings, which I believe is how it is now, what this proposes is the right thing to do.
Okay, sounds good. If there's no objection, I will work this text back in for the next revision. Okay. Here's the other open issues. Some of these popped up not too recent or very recently. Alexi, did you want to go to the open issues page and work through these one by one, or how do you want to move from here? This is my last slide.
I don't think we need to go through GitHub. Let's just quickly talk over this. CNAME handling, last time. So I'm trying to remember what the state of this is. I think there was some deficiency in RFC 5321 bis, which got clarified recently. And initially we wanted to add some text to AS. I don't think we added any text to AS. I think John was supposed to come up with some text. Last time we talked about it, John, you said that you did. I don't remember any text. Can you just check your records and see if any text, if you can propose any text or suggest that we close this issue?
Yeah, John did propose text. I missed it, and I apologize if I did.
When was that? Can you remind me?
Are you asking me, Lexi?
Can you remind me when was this John proposed text?
No, I said if John proposed text, I missed it, and I apologize for doing so. I'm just checking the. I'm checking email logs. The two emails from John that I see related to ticket 92 on the list basically says he was working on 21 bis and didn't have time to get back to this. So I don't believe John's proposed anything as of yet.
Okay. 109. So this ticket is originally about start TLS in 5321 bis. We haven't addressed, we decided not to talk about start TLS there. And there is a separate, and 113 is about start TLS in a way, anyway. So I close this ticket. 110 reference to DKIM. I mean, we do have a reference, but as a part of my review and John's comments, I think the text about DKIM can be improved, and maybe a better explanation of what it doesn't do, as well as, John proposed, mentioning DKIM 2 and stuff like that. So I think this is just a placeholder for this sort of discussions. 113 is effectively we'll be talking a little bit more about this. This is about the whole section 6. The last two tickets are while I was doing my review. So firstly, I've noticed that 5321 bis talks about message authenticity using OpenPGP and SMIME, and AS only talks about confidentiality. I think AS needs to talk about both. So I think a venue section or expansion of existing section is needed, which brought me to another thing, which is LAMP's header protection document, which is now in RFC editor's queue, is the new and the only way of protecting headers, especially when doing confidentiality, because again, SMIME can be like encrypt only without header protection, so it encrypts everything but doesn't actually protect the header because they also copy it on outside. So there are some subtle issues that we probably maybe shouldn't discuss in all details, but at least mention that if we need header protection, then there are extra documents we should reference. Yeah, I think that's it on this list.
Any feedback on these? Alexi, I'm gonna stop the slides unless
is this your last slide?
This is my last slide. I believe so.
I'll switch. Okay. Thank you. I'll switch back to. Yes, John?
Well, I promised you a quick summary before we move on of my notes from last night. My apologies for not getting them up sooner. On the other hand, they could have been even later. I'm there are a number of places in the current AS draft that don't reflect changes which were made to 5321 bis in the last gasps of reviewing that document, and other things which were explained in detail in 5321 bis long ago, which doesn't pick up and cross-reference. That includes the quoted string issue and some other things. These are all in the notes. But the other big issue is the AS is not nearly clear enough about the difference between, I'm going to try to avoid using terms which are ambiguous, message originator to message receipt, confidentiality and authentication and tamper-proofness, which are not all the same. The distinction between encryption and confidentiality is confusing given other kinds of history and other options, and we really, I think, need to bear down and focus on again the difference between hop by hop protection and end-to-end protection. And even when we're talking about end-to-end protection, where the ends we're talking about are the originating user and receiving user, or their systems, or various things more or less in between. That's detailed there. And in the other note I sent out yesterday about the TLS issues in general, it's unfortunate that that one participant who, for lack of a better term, I'll describe as Rob Helpful, was not able to get on this call, but he continues to be helpful, and I don't know at all how to handle that, because it could bog us down forever. But that's more or less what's in that document. And I think at least some of those changes and clarifications and the associated cross references, which are not hard to do, obviously, are important. Thanks.
I do actually have a couple of slides on this, John. So they're just in a few slides. So I think you did cover most of hop by hop versus end-to-end encryption thing. We can talk more about them there. And I use your text about Startilla, so we can talk about
There's clearly overlap between my note from last night and your review of the document and my comments on your review of the document and so on. So
absolutely. Yeah, I didn't. I couldn't quite distill it to a small set of slides, so I basically used my comments as a prompt for discussing this sort of issues, but we can come back to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right. So, I would like to revisit a few things, which I haven't spotted, at least initially. This is one of the issues is at the moment AS points to what working group document in regards to recommended email address syntax grammar. And this is what this document says. If you look at this, one thing which is obvious, it doesn't allow for quoted strings, which might or might not be an issue. Actually, I have another slide on this. So quoted strings are not allowed. Again, I think we need to decide whether we want to recommend full syntax or not. Another thing that John pointed out from this syntax is that sequential dots are allowed by what working group syntax are not allowed by 5321 bis. And funny thing is that you can only have multiple dots if the whole local part is quoted. So it's not allowed outside because it's in unquoted version is atom.atom.atom, etc. And John also pointed out, so for internationalized email addresses, non-ASCII is not allowed. So I would like to voice my concern of referencing what working group ABNF. So I don't think we should point to a document where the value is definitely broken. If we can come up with a better ABNF and convince them to change, then maybe I can change my mind. But also there is another issue of what working group they can change the syntax after the fact, because it's a living document. So what should we do about this? Pete?
I agree with, that with the broken syntax, referring to it as really dumb. It's an easy fix. We can give them the easy fix. I understand the concern about, referring to it. On the other hand, the ABNF that is 2 lines. If we want to just show the ABNF in this document with the correct syntax, which I could write in 2 minutes, we could do that, and just say, all A text with internal dots is, and again, without repeating dots. It's pretty straightforward. I don't understand why they didn't just use dot atom, but maybe that has comments or white space in it or something like that.
No, atom is not allowed to have white space.
No, dot atom. There's a dot atom construct
Well,
in 5322 bis.
in between dot and other things, in theory, you can have white spaces,
Right.
but they could have
So,
still
but it would be
produced more
very simple
restrictive
to
version.
it would be very simple to write up ABNF that is correct, that we could just stick in this document and say, the recommended way to do this is this syntax, which doesn't have all the extra stuff, and be done.
Yes, I agree with you on this one. John?
Just two observations about easy fixes. The first is that putting in that ABNF leaves us back in the position where we are excluding non-ASCII email and that email addresses, and that's bad news. And the second observation is that in discussions between the W3C I18N group and WhatWG, WhatWG has been very, very, to put it mildly, belligerent about the particular language and syntax they chose. And at this point, whether it was a mistake at the beginning or not, it is not considered a mistake now. It is considered something about which they have their heels dug in. So I think your recommendation is about right. And I also have issues mentioned in my note about living standards now. Any of that could change instantly. So I think your suggestion is exactly right. We mention it, we do not reference it, we point out its limitations, and we move on.
Okay. And in response to your internationalization thing, if we want, we can include internationalized version of local parts as well as in the syntax we propose, if we chose to do it this way.
Well, it has to be both local part and domain part, because the SNTP UTF-8 specs strongly discourage using A labels rather than the spelled out form if one is going to have a non-ASCII local part. But details we can tune.
Yeah, we can take this on to the mailing list. Cam?
I think Pete's first, unless he just didn't pull himself out of the queue.
I was just going to say that as I remember, the internationalized email address stuff extends the 5322 stuff, so extends a text, for instance. It adds on a bunch of characters. So I think it's, perfectly plausible to even write the syntax and refer to both documents and say, you want to do internationalized, you can use these extensions as well. But
Yes.
having the simple syntax, I think, is not harmful.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just trying to clarify, because I thought I heard John say, discuss the limitations of what's allowed in a email or in a web form in the text, but do not provide the syntax. Is that what you said, John, or did I misinterpret that?
I think we can provide syntax if it's consistent with our specs, but that doesn't tell people anything about what WG is doing. And I'm reluctant to quote what WG syntax, because this is an ongoing argument between what WG and parts of W3C, and it could change any minute. Thursday, before we go to publication, after we go to publication. So I just want to be very careful about that particular gray area.
Yeah, basically we're trying to tell people you can't use the full 2122 syntax in a web form. This is a limited set that you probably should stick to, right?
Well, if you're going to do web forms and you want them to be safe, then you want to pay attention to whatever the WG spec is at the moment. And if you want to be really safe, you need, as John Levine pointed out on the chat, to be even more conservative about that. Or
right.
Alternative is you avoid using type equals email entirely and just build your web form some other way. And I don't know if we want to say that or not.
Dave?
Hi, so I've been listening to this exchange and I understand why this community cares about what those guys are doing. What I'm not understanding is why this AS, given what I thought its focus was, which is about actual email, would contain references to the work outside of the scope of this group. At a minimum, I'm suggesting that there be some statement in this discussion about exactly what the goal is, because it may help focus what to do about it. My belief from what I've been hearing is that it's another group, they're doing their stuff, and while it will have a blowback into email community, it isn't the work of this working group AS.
Yeah, I think we would have been more. Yeah, I don't actually remember why we added it in the first place. I think it was close enough thing that was in use, but now that we found some issues with it, I don't think we want to reference it. At least that's what I'm hearing. Okay. Todd, can you minute this? I think we have rough consistency.
I heard Davis suggested we go even further, which is to appoint steady progress for SWAT.
I didn't have that in mind, although it certainly seems like a reasonable thing to do to get on the record a statement from the expert email community about what I assume is a problem being caused by this other group outside of this community.
Okay, good.
So just so I'm clear, we are still going to mention the community, but we're not going to talk about their syntax. We're not going to reference it. We're going to say that it's a problem. Is that correct? Is that what I'm minuting?
My understanding is that we are going to propose ABNF. We might mention the what working group document, and we need to decide what kind of text we want around it. So I think doing the right ABNF is the minimum, and then the rest will. Peter's doing work in the chat while we're doing that. Dave?
So I think what I just heard you say is that the AS will contain a reference to what working group. Do I have that wrong?
We do have a reference now. Obviously, if we're doing ABNF, it's not going to be normative. Is it better not to say anything about them and not have a reference, or have a reference and explain why we are not using it? I don't know. I think that yet to be decided. Does
Okay.
it help?
My thought was that while this is an important issue, it is an issue that I would have thought was outside of the scope of this AS, and that this AS should not make a reference to that other work, whereas this community might want to very actively pursue public commentary on the issues with what's happening outside of this community by that other group.
Okay. Pete also said in the chat that he's agreeing with you about removing the reference. I will be fine with that.
Alexei, I suggest we reopen issue 51 where this originated, and we can continue discussion over there. Does that make sense?
Yes. Are you happy to reopen it while we discussing this?
I don't know if I can. I don't think I have the permissions, but I will try.
Okay, fine. Well, can we we'll reopen the issue 51, you said?
Yes, 51.
Okay, and then I think at the moment we're agreeing to do ABNF, and we probably will remove the reference, yes. But I think let's just have a bit more discussion on the mailing list, just to be sure. Yes, I think we will keep text about. We need to explain why we are doing this in the first place. To say, like, if you want to be the most interoperable, this is the simplest syntax that you should support. Okay, moving on. So this is the issue that John brought up about AS potentially having a inconsistent statement, having a saying must not generate the for clause where 5321 bis use should not. I did check the text in section 7.2 or 5321 bis. It's not exactly saying that. It's saying should not copy the RCPT2 command arguments to the header section. So it's the must not is more specific in AS. Okay, so we have an inconsistency, and what should we do about this? Well,
the easiest thing to do is to change the text in the AS to say should not in reference the material in 5321 bis. If we feel more strongly about that, then we should probably have a discussion about a last minute change to 5321 bis to put the must not in there and hope that that doesn't send us back into arguments with the ISG.
That is one possible way forward. Yes, indeed.
Two possible ways forward.
Yes.
I actually think should not is appropriate here. If some server actually knows something about what those multiple receipt twos mean, right? So a local delivery server knows that these are two mailing lists and they both are reasonable to expose, or whatever the heck. The should not is don't do it. You must not unless you know what the heck you're doing. And so, I think must notting this is probably overstating the case. I think almost nobody should go down that path because how would you know? And our server's smart enough to do that. But we could do a should not with a clause that says, and you'd be an idiot to try. But I think should not is probably technically correct.
John, you're muted. John, muted.
Sorry. And what I said was I was agreeing with Pete and pointing out that if we put should not in both places, we could put you be an idiot to try in the AS without any contradictions here.
I'm personally okay with this. I don't hear that many other options. Ken?
I'm okay with going to should not. I'm just looking at ticket 55 where this originated. I proposed what appears to be the current text with the must not, but I don't see any indication as to why I chose must not over should not. There were no comments, so this has been in it for a little bit. Looks like people finally caught it. So I'm, based on what John and Peter said, I'm totally comfortable switching this to should not.
Okay, let's do
Oh.
it.
I'll continue to look on the list to see if there's any justification for the must not, but I'm guessing I'm not going to find any.
Yes, absent any explanation for must not, let's switch to should not and then resolve this. Okay, moving on. Start TLS. John, would you like to talk about this quickly, or would you rather I read your comments?
I'm I'm happy to talk about it quickly, although I feel like this has been beaten to death repeatedly. And I think John Levine's summary on the mailing list is just right. A must implies that it is required in all possible cases. There are cases where it either doesn't make any sense, or it's useless overhead, or it's a problem, or completely different mechanisms are being used. And as a consequence, nothing stronger than should is appropriate. And then the other thing I'm concerned about, and I've been concerned about all along, mentioned earlier, mentioned at length in the mailing list, is that if we're going to go on an adventure into Start TLS, we need to be extremely clear, even for the relatively naive user who's looking at the AS for guidance, but is not an email expert or security expert, what this business of encryption hop by hop means and where the vulnerabilities lie. And if that's not more or less what I said, I apologize. Different aspects of the same problem.
Right. I snuck in a note on the slide as a participant, but I'll voice it. Partially for the reasons you state, that there are some environments where it might not be appropriate, and partially how the text is already stating three things. Firstly, we already discuss opportunistic and mandatory TLS separately in different sections. Secondly, we say that you must support this in the server, which I think is hopefully non-controversial. What we are not saying is that you must use it. And I propose we say nothing about this for specifically the reasons that you mentioned. Realistically, if I'm an implementer and I want to talk to various other providers, I have to implement this. And as an implementer, I'm okay with this. Whether specific clients or specific configuration choose to use it, that's a separate issue, and I don't think we should get into too much details of this. Okay. John? You're muted.
Sorry, tried to push the
Yeah.
button. I'm inclined to agree with saying nothing. I hope we can push back on the people who say must. I think it would be fairly easy for me to go and ask a few major mail systems saying, if we said must, would you ignore us? And they would all say yes. So I mean, it would just make us look silly. And I would not be opposed to coming up with some other separate document, not dependent, not. out of the flow of any of these. It actually tries to look at the actual security model of hop by hop mail and where it's encrypted and where you need to look at it and stuff like that. It's worth talking about, but it's not something we can try and put in here just because it is both complicated and it is contentious because we suffer from people who think they understand it but don't.
Okay. Pete?
I'm hesitant to go down this particular path, but I want to at least put it out there. And we're getting a little weirdly legalistic here. 2119 says of must that you don't use must, you only use must where it's required for interoperation or to limit behavior which has the potential for causing harm. Well, guess what? If you don't use TLS, there's the potential for causing harm. You know what else is true? If you use TLS and require it everywhere, you are screwing interoperation because there are going to be some things that you need to receive mail from that are only going to do clear text, and that means you're going to not allow that mail to be deliverable. Or if you're on the sending side, if you're on the receiving side, if you don't accept things in clear text, right? There's sort of you're not allowing delivery of things that will come in clear text, and that lowers interoperation. And I don't know if anybody has the stomach for you must use it in order to be safe, and you must allow its non-use in order to be fully interoperable in today's, on today's network. But I think that's sort of the point that's being missed by the folks who want the must TLS is if you want deliverability, you must not use it in some cases. And I don't know what to do with that and what text we should produce given that, but there it is.
So you've been devil advocate and now, you're not suggesting any text.
No, I'm rude like that.
Yes. Okay.
And lazy,
John?
Sorry, I need to take my hand down.
I was worried about the John ambiguity for a moment there. First of all, I completely agree with Pete. And the additional concern I've mentioned several times is that in the direction in which the world is going, we're getting closer and closer to the point where some country is going to stand up and say, you must not send this stuff over an encrypted link, at least unless we have the keys. We've been there before and we will likely be there again. And that goes directly to Pete's comment that requiring encryption here is equivalent to saying, no, you can't use email. So completely agree there. The other observation is that I'm okay with not including a detailed discussion of the hop by hop issues here. I semi-agree with John Levine's comment about that, but especially if we're not going to do that, then the text needs to be frightfully clear about when we're talking about a hop versus when we're talking about end-to-end. And it isn't now. I think it can be fixed, but it needs to be very clear, carefully written and clear.
Daniel?
I think those are good comments, but I think it's also a bit outside of this. I think it's good to mandate start TLS, and if some country doesn't want to do encryption, then they can just mandate to do TLS without encryption. I mean, TLS is just TLS, and you can have non-encrypted TLS or have some version of TLS or some keys that are not like that some specific person can read, that's sort of all in the TLS scope, and we don't need to get into that. I think mandating TLS doesn't prevent anybody from sort of going down that route. TLS also, even if you have non-encrypted TLS, it provides very strong error correction, which you just don't have over plain text. So I think it's very good to mandate it, even if you don't want encrypted. It's better to have unencrypted TLS than having plain text. So I don't see why anybody would mind forcing start TLS.
I think that's slightly more complicated and subtle than that, even with TLS, because I think TLS 1.3 doesn't allow no encryption. TLS 1.2 does. So again,
okay, but then even then, if some country wants to say, well, you shouldn't encrypt it, then they can just say, if you want to talk to the server, we need to have the certificate. And then they can do whatever they want. Again, I think this kind of backdoor thing is sort of a very parallel discussion to we want to have TLS. Like if I want to know what everybody's sending to your mail server and I'm strong enough to force you, then I can just tell you, give me your private keys. I don't need to tell you to turn off TLS.
Okay, John?
I think, first of all, Daniel, you're assuming a much higher degree of sophistication by parties who are inclined to be very reactive than is appropriate. It also leads to the other issue, which is that if the traffic is secured or authenticated or confidential because of other mechanisms, forcing start TLS on top of those mechanisms is at worst a waste of time and at best a waste of time, and at worst a real problem with interfering with the other mechanisms may actually be more secure. These are all arguments coming back to Pete's comment about the definition of must, for avoiding must, saying should, and if necessary, although I prefer to avoid it, going into as much explanation as possible about what the exceptions to should ought to be. Should is a pretty strong recommendation. And should, and you would have to be a little bit nuts or otherwise constrained not to, is an even stronger statement, but it still should.
Okay. I don't hear exact agreement on specific direction we want to go, but I think maybe having should use start TLS and explaining something along the lines of what Pete did earlier might be a possible way forward. I think we need to take this to the mailing list. Okay. So, and this is the thing that a list of related issues that I think John talked about earlier on. I think we want to explain in more details which mechanisms are hop by hop and which are end-to-end and implications, as well as talk about which identities are authenticated or which objects are protected in various cases. Okay, John?
Yeah, after getting a few hours sleep after sending down last night's note, I think the best way to address some of these problems, or at least the easiest way, is to get a little bit of additional terminology section into the AS. Make it very clear what we're talking about when we're talking about endpoints and channels and other things. And then once we've established that terminology, we use it absolutely consistently through the document. That also applies to things like client and server and SMTP center and all the rest of that. I think if we put in a terminology section that's specific to documents, make the terminology as close to 5322 and 5321 BIS as we can, and then be consistent about it, we'll be out of a lot of these traps. Maybe not 100%, but really very close.
Sounds like a very reasonable way forward. Any other comments on this? And I think my suggestion would be for the editors to propose some edits to the section and try to suggest introduction of consistent terminology. Okay. Hearing no further comments on this. Let's move on to the fun stuff, maybe. Okay. As I said earlier, 5321 BIS is nearly done. There are a few, I'm pretty sure we're pretty close. Due to miscommunication, I think Ayana were replying to some of the messages sent earlier, and they sent comments which were sent as private comments. They will post them to data tracker and to the mailing list. They also send me preview of what they found with version 40, which is a list of little remaining things. Once their review of 40 is posted to the mailing list, I will propose some specific changes. I'm not quite ready to talk about them. I think I will mention a couple on some of the following slides, but some specific details will go to the mailing list. So the other thing what I've done is, because of the set of type of questions that Ayana was asking, it made me realize that maybe some information was missing in the document. So what I've done is I basically decided to follow the Ayana procedure in 5321 BIS to the letter. And I took existing spreadsheet and I basically extended it with instructions. As per 5321 BIS version 40. So I'm not going to show you the spreadsheet, but if you want, I can send it to the mailing list. Not surprisingly, I found that there is already some brokenness in existing registry. So some stuff is already not quite matching existing RFCs. So because of this, we have a plan. So the plan is roughly this. I don't think 5321 BIS needs to clean up all the things which are invalid for specific entries in SMTP services registry, for example. Because sorting this out and adding all the missing information will take time. I think what 5321 bis says now is roughly correct, other than just some minor clarifications. My proposal is this. I will post a separate draft that assumes that changes and extra column added by 5321 bis to SMTP services registry are implemented, and it will fix existing entries and fill in information from other RFCs which is missing. This slide demonstrates few things I already found. For example, hello parameters. Well, there is a separate registry for hello parameters. This registry doesn't have entries for 3 RFCs listed, deliver by future release and limits. Fields like whether a specific extension can be used for message submission. RFC 6409 gives a good list, but it also doesn't cover all RFCs that are allowed on submission. I also went through various RFCs. Some of them recommend length edit field for extensions to mail from and RCPT2 that they're adding, and some of them do not, etc., etc. So proposal is I'll do a separate draft that is not going to block this work. It's not going to block 5321 bis from being completed. We'll take it to the mail maintenance working group and do it there. And if people are happy with me doing this, that's great. If somebody wants to co-edit, John Clancy, I mentioned your name just because some of the stuff was inspired by what you suggested, but you don't have to take up on my offer. Yes, John.
Well, first of all, your second bullet was completely anticipated, and as we have communicated off the list, one of my big concerns here is that we've gotten this so far overspecified as a consequence of perhaps accidental changes to the working group and responses to previous comments that and then responses to previous shall we say input from Diana that we've gotten this thing so far overspecified that it may be impossible to get registrations right. And again, to discover that there are errors is no problem at all. All of that said, if we can move this off into a separate document and get it out of the critical path of 5321, I'm all in favor of that. The only concern I have is the possibility that either IANA or somebody on the ISG or some ever helpful participant in the mailing list will insist that if we're going to do that, that there be a normative forward reference from 5321 bis, and that puts us back into the nothing gets published until everybody's happy rat hole. And that doesn't solve the problem. So if you're convinced this will work, I certainly am in favor of it, but I am concerned that it just takes us into another bad place.
I suppose it's a valid point, but I hope I can construct an argument against it. For the most part, information that we are adding I mean, somebody can go and dig it out from existing RFCs and calculate various values. This is basically what I've done. I created the spreadsheet. It's just, but I think I don't think it's IANA's job to do this because they don't necessarily have the technical skills. In particular, calculating length added for extensions which don't say anything about what needs to be added, they shouldn't be doing this. It might, I wouldn't necessarily say it's entirely a trivial thing, but I think we as engineers should help them out with this. So yeah, let's try this. I'm very happy to do this posted draft before Bangkok IETF, so that at least people can have a look at it.
Okay.
And yeah, we'll see where it goes. I have a few more slides demonstrating the problem. And yeah, go on.
I just want to point out that we would not be in this situation had IANA already stepped into areas which are beyond their competence, at least in my opinion. But okay, and I will be happy to collaborate with you on a draft of this document and make the decisions whether I should be co-author after we see what that document, after what that draft looks like.
Okay. I think it's slightly complicated because I think there are a few little decisions that are made in 5321 base by saying that all fields have to be displayed. In particular, again, we can decide saying, certain fields we don't have to display. They need to be registered if available, but don't have to be displayed. And because of that, I start asking, well, what do we put there other than not provided? Which is a valid question.
That's a valid question.
Yeah. Okay. So I will go through a few things which are kind of nits related to how the final registry is going to look like. And just bear with me. I appreciate this is like little niggly things, but so this is how the registry might look like after 5321 bis is done, but before this other document is written. So I gave you 3 examples. One is the line for auth SMTP extension. One is for the BRL SMTP extension. And one is for first come, first served registration of my Shiny SMTP extension. So if we just follow what 5321 bis says now, then additional verbs and mail RCPT parameter values will not have specific information. They will just point to RFC that specify them. Length added, because this information is not specified, is going to be not provided. Either not provided or again a reference to the RFC. Again, not super important. So the only other thing, sorry, I should have introduced the table. The 2 columns in blue are what already exists in the IANA registry right now. The 2 columns in red also exist in the registry, but we potentially thinking of getting rid of them. The columns with teal or green is all the extra fields that are added by 5321 bis. So questions here is, if you look at the line for the Shiny first come first serve extension, I actually have provided description saying my Shiny SMTP extension, but from how I read the document, I think even description is not necessary. John, can you confirm? whether you were thinking of description being required for first come first serve, or whether it's still optional for them.
What we wrote in Model 2 is that everything is optional, but some things are strongly encouraged.
Okay.
So
That's what I read as well, but I want to double check. As specified, like contact information and change control will always be required by IANA, and the hello keyword will be required by IANA. So these are the only things that are required. Everything else is optional.
now it
people,
would be, sorry,
yeah.
it would be entirely reasonable if we're going to change 5321 to do this. It'd be entirely reasonable to require some minimal description along with a name, but that's not what it requires now.
That's what I was getting at. Maybe we can just change description to be required, because realistically, people can write a sentence.
As long as we don't specify what is required when it is required, I think we're fine. Now, not specifying what's required when it's required is something IANA has objected to in the recent past, but maybe we can get this past them.
Okay. All right. So maybe we'll do this change to make description mandatory in both models, because I don't think it's a very high bar. And then if we do that, that basically my example demonstrates how the registry entries will look like. I have a few more questions on the following slides, but I want to quickly discuss whether we want to keep reference and notes, but hold on this thought just for a moment until I get to the slide where we. So this is how.
Alexei, have you cleared recombining content and change controller, or is this just an abbreviation?
It's abbreviation. They're separate fields. Yes.
Okay.
And I also had very little space, so yeah. My apologies for the confusion. But
no, it's fine. I tried to combine them and got pushed back, so I thought I'd better check.
No, don't combine them. They are separate. Yeah. Okay. And the example of first come first serve demonstrate why they're separate, because you have John Doe, who is a contact, and he is doing it on behalf of Shiny Corporation, which is, I mean, it can be the same person, or but it can be different. So this is how the same entries might look like after we do the second document I was proposing, where it actually fills in the relevant information. So here there is more details about additional verbs, like auth adds auth command, BRL adds BRL command, auth adds auth parameter to mail command, and BRL doesn't add any parameters to mail to or RCPT to. And also length added can be specifically calculated. A little thing in the message submission use and values is one reason why I suggest we write a separate document is because several documents say certain extension is allowed for submission or not allowed. Not allowed, it means must not in the submission column. What does allowed means? I think it means may, but maybe we'll just spell it out in this draft and for the 7 or 8 RFCs that are not so specific about this. Yeah. Yes, John?
I don't know if this covers all the cases you had in mind, but that particular comment and note might easily be accommodated by a slight redefinition and expansion on message submission use and values, and be much more obvious there.
Can you elaborate what you have in mind?
Well, if we define message submission use and values, which is a peculiarity already because it's been there. It was just a separate registry, which seemed more confusing than it was worth. But if we redefine that field effectively as message submission use values, associated notes, then the information you have in note on Burl would collapse into there because it specifically is about message submission. I'm trying to avoid doing things which make the note field more complicated and more normative rather than explanatory. And this is normative. Again, if we're doing this in a separate document, we can sort this out later.
Sounds good. Fine. And then, yeah, so a few remaining issues from this is the current registry have notes which mostly discuss special cases like only allowed for submission or only allowed on port 25, etc. Do we want to also have notes field in the registry? Or if not, as John says, it can either information can move to the submission field or it can be combined with description. John?
Remember that when we tried to have a separate field for some additional details that I then wanted to fold into description, make things less complicated, I got pushback from that from the usual source. I think we'd be better off leaving notes there for special cases we can't anticipate, but writing text which more or less says that if you need to put stuff in notes, maybe you should be thinking about where else it should go.
Okay, sounds good to me. And also the good side effect of
I just don't want to have fights we don't need to have, especially since a large fraction of the IR registries contain a notes field. And
yeah, that was, I was about to say that actually notes field is quite common in IAN registries, exactly for the cases like you say, where you have information which is not necessarily part of a description, but kind of describing special cases. Okay, so we'll double check this on the mailing list, but if people don't object, we'll add the notes field as a separate thing. This is a slide on something that Ayana asked before and we forgot to implement. Again, this is for the most part, it's just a reminder for us to do this, and I can send specific text. John?
I'm not going to take the time to look for it now, but I think I did implement it. It's just not in the place.
I didn't find it.
Well, then I need to look again.
Okay. If you can double check and either confirm that you implemented it, and if you did, if you can point out where, and if not, then I'll suggest it where to insert it. Okay, and
now what she had actually asked for is that we go enumerate all those registries, and that's something I did not try to do.
say it again.
What she had asked for, at least
Yes.
at one point, is that we take responsibility for identifying all those registries and listing them. So what she asked for was was the reference in registry 1, registry 2, registry 3, registry 4 should be updated.
I think the latest, what I've heard from Ayana, they actually listed 5 URLs that contains reference. This is all they found. I did a quick scan, and I think they're all reasonable to be updated to the new specs. So,
The one official ANA review we have so far listed the registries that they thought were the issues. And I said, yes, as far as I can tell, after glancing around, that looked right to me. But then we were told that identifying and listing registries is our problem. And if we're now back to this kind of statement, I think that's fine.
And with that, I think I'm coming up to next steps. So, Ayana will post the latest comments to data tracker or mailing list. And I think if they post to data tracker, it will go to the mailing list automatically. Yes, John?
Okay. I will start on generating -41, but we'll wait for the minutes and notes to cross-check that. I'll check on the text on the previous slide and get back to the list if I think that's covered. But the one question I have is, do you want 5321 bis to mention this proposed new draft, or are we just going to ignore that and hope for the best?
Don't mention it. And basically, I think it's increment. One is basically patching what's produced. The new draft will patch update fields not covered by 5321 bis.
Okay, I think that's fine, as long as we don't get pushback from somewhere that says our fields are inadequately defined, there's enough information there, they don't want to dig out the information, or any of those other things, which would be reasonable accusations against 5321 bis if we are deferring some of that work for a future document we're not talking about yet.
I did check with Ayana whether they were okay with this, just split, and they were. I wish Murray was here. I also checked with him, and he was okay with it as well.
Then
I hope this helps.
Then you have had much more productive and positive and forward-looking conversations with Ayana than I have, and I am grateful for that.
Okay. And I think that's it. And then obviously we'll finish working group last call on AS, and there are some topics we need to continue discussing as a result of last call as well as this interim.
You should probably have added as a bullet item a request for people to look at the notes I posted last night about the AS, because there are a lot of proposed changes there, and feedback from the working group is important before Ken and I solve reality and go at it.
Yes, I had a quick scan of your suggestions, and I think they look pretty straightforward. I think they're good suggestions. So if you want, I can create a ticket, but I didn't want to create a ticket like of mega editorial changes. It's up to you. If you want, I can create one.
I don't care one way or the other about tickets, but somebody besides, and I agree that I think most of that's straightforward, other than the Start TLS controversy, what to do about it. But I do think that people need to look through that to make certain that I and we have not missed anything important.
Okay, I'll reply as a participant. I think I was like 95% of it was good catch, great improvements, and 5% was I'm not entirely sure, but I would rather see the text, and then I can say whether I agree or I can complain.
Well, identifying those things and making the proposed text on the list is entirely reasonable. There are other things there where I said we should do either X or Y or maybe Z. And again, that's something we're going to need feedback about.
Okay. Right. And with this, we are at 90 minutes. And we used all of our time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for productive conversations. We do have a session booked in Bangkok, I think, which we'll see whether we'll need it. All right. Bye all.